Okay, so morning everyone. So I'm Foxon from the University of Leeds. Most of you here. So we are also going to do double act. So I'm going to start off and then hand over to Ronan to talk about the case studies and then the discussions that we're drawing. So we are. This is in the context of our work on transition pathways to low carbon electricity systems. So we are coming from a sort of socio-technical systems perspective in this paper, and trying to see what lessons for energy governance we can draw from that literature. I think, and this is in the context of, say, of our work developing transition pathways for all the carbon electricity systems in the UK. So we've developed work on 3 pathways. One following a market logic, one following a government logic, and one following a civil society logic. And so we are arguing that we are, in the UK, we are moving from a more market-driven pathway towards a sort of hybrid market-government pathway, and sort of interesting questions about how stable that is. And so our sort of starting point is the Energy Trilemma. Again, this is sort of a dominant narrative in the discussions and in the discourse about the challenges of achieving the dramatic carbon emission reductions that are in the Climate Change Act and the carbon budgets, but at the same time doing this in a way which is politically acceptable, and that relates to the costs to energy users, both households and businesses, and maintaining energy security and security of energy supply, which is clearly, again, that's a sort of residual rule that the government has, even though it doesn't have direct influence on it has through indirect mechanisms. So starting from the sort of privatisation and market liberalisation being the dominant context for energy in the UK since the 1990s, sort of set out very well in Catherine's book around the regulatory state paradigm, again drawing on some of the physical science literature, a clear market logic, and regulatory oversight, but minimal direct intervention, and again this was ostensibly technology neutral approach, but as we know in practice that tends to favour particular technologies, and around investment decisions being based on market signals. So this idea of government sets the framework and then gets out of the way, and it's up to the market actors to make decisions. So we've seen, obviously, since in the 2000s, the emergence of firstly the decarbonisation agenda, but simultaneously and interacting with that, the energy security agenda, and these are interacting with the dominant market liberalisation framework, but we are, there hasn't been a paradigm change yet, and we've got this sort of, as we say, this sort of hybrid, and that the framing provided by the market liberalisation paradigm is still dominant, and that's influencing how the decarbonisation narrative is being put into practice. So we have these competing framings, the market liberalisation framing of the market being the most efficient mechanism of resource allocation, around objectives of efficient investment asset utilisation, certain the regulatory frameworks are competitive, wholesale supply markets and regulated transmission distribution networks, which is all aimed at the main imperative of reducing the costs to the energy users. Now, on top of that, we now get this long-term transformation, decarbonisation and energy security narrative around meeting the long-term climate change and energy security targets. So scenarios being developed by climate change and others around decarbonisation of electricity, such as supply, electrification of heat and transport, new institutions being formed, on climate change having a strong role, and this being very much framed as an investment challenge. So that these policies are being designed to encourage investment by private sector in technologies to achieve the decarbonisation and security objectives alongside the maintaining affordability of cost to users. So we're going to talk more about it. Okay.
So what comes out quite clearly in the empirical side of the paper is that we're by no means seeing like the end or the death of market liberalisation and a paradigm change to a long-term transformation agenda. While the two framings and agendas are kind of enmeshed and interweaved in very complex ways. And through the case studies we highlight the role of incumbent actors, particularly national government and large-scale energy companies, in creating a framing around the low-carbon transition as an investment challenge. And this is largely an effort to create kind of synergies between these two types of agendas. And that's one thing that comes out. And also focusing more specifically on actor dynamics and this kind of hybrid pathway that's emerging between national government on the one hand and market actors on the other. And we're seeing more government intervention as an effort to de-risk investments and coordinate investment programs, but still a significant role for market processes and market actors in the delivery of those priorities. So the case studies, we look at two of the kind of key policy areas, two of them in the UK at the moment. One is the smart metering rollout and the electricity market reform proposals, which are currently going through Parliament. So these are kind of key pillars of UK energy governance at the moment. So we're seeing this kind of trade-off between multiple objectives. It's not a clear kind of objective of market liberalisation anymore. There's kind of energy security and decarbonisation as part of this complex mix. So there's at times an uncertain rationale for policy interventions. We're seeing new actor dynamics, and we highlight this interaction between government and market as particularly important. So we're in this messy, complex and uncertain phase, and we highlight the kind of socio-technical understanding as an interesting way to frame and understand this. Because we're seeing new technologies, new institutions, new types of user practices and framings of the user, new types of business strategies. And these kinds of dynamics can't be understood in isolation. There's a kind of a co-evolutionary process. So I think a systems framing is useful to analyse the kind of interactions between these, which is important. And we pick on two kind of particular insights from the transition literature. One, that we're seeing a process of regime adaptation, so the kind of incumbent centralised national actors are adapting and changing to these new kind of pressures and priorities. And also this idea of hybrid, that this kind of central coordination, market-led pathway, or government-led pathway and a kind of market-led pathway are becoming enmeshed and intertwined pathways as part of an action space. So the smart metering case study, just very briefly go through. Smart metering is more real-time information on customer use. And in 2008, government announced a national rollout of smart metering to take place by 2020. And we talked about the rationale for the rollout and the specific design of the rollout. But smart metering has been a policy priority since the early 2000s, actually, particularly advanced by Ofgem, the regulator. And at that time, metering services it was an attempt to deregulate metering provision. It wasn't regulated asset base. And this was an effort to promote competition between suppliers, improve efficiency of the retail market, and by reducing transaction costs and to increase switching between suppliers. So it was a clear kind of market agenda around smart metering at the time. But however, Ofgem's market-led strategy, there was a recognition that it largely failed and that this kind of market-led approach led to little metering innovation. And then in 2008, around the time of the Energy Bill, the government announced a national rollout of smart metering, so this kind of government intervention in the system. And smart metering became reframed as, along with a kind of a way of achieving efficient markets, it also became an enabler for a kind of a wider transformation of the energy infrastructure, the kind of first step towards achieving smart grids, and a way of promoting energy efficiency and demand reduction and decarbonisation. So we saw this government intervention around the national rollout, and there was multiple rationales for that: demand reduction as a smart grid enabler, and to promote market efficiency. But despite this kind of strong government intervention, there is still strong elements of the kind of market liberalisation framing. There's a supplier-led rollout, whereas in most other countries, the regulated distribution companies are leading the rollout. And some have argued that this kind of regulated approach would be more conducive to achieve kind of wider transformation towards smart grid. So the reasons why we're seeing this kind of retail-led strategy in terms of the rollout is quite interesting and kind of emblematic of this lock-in of kind of market liberalisation elements. Electricity market reform proposals, some of you will be familiar with these. These are government proposals largely to regulate investments in large-scale low-carbon generation, nuclear, carbon capture and storage and renewables. And the rationale for this is that the problem with the current market design is that it favours investment in low capital cost gas generation. And since 2003, this is something that Caroline has started in her PhD, we've seen it coming together of the energy security and decarbonisation agendas. And we're now seeing new institutional innovations, again, government intervention to change the market framework. And the key policy initiative is contracts for difference for low carbon generation. These are long-term contracts where the prices for those contracts are centrally negotiated between government and market actors. But again, we're seeing some retention of key elements of the market liberalisation framing. Large energy companies are still seen as leading this investment, and this kind of new complex policy framework has created some uncertainty, and some argue that it has led to a hiatus in investment. And there's also kind of a lot of mixed messages between different arms of government. The Treasury aren't so keen on the low carbon agenda that TEC is trying to promote. There's kind of internal tensions within government. And there is an intention on government's part, this is in the policy documents, to revert to a market selection process sometime in the 2020s. So they see this as a temporary intervention in the system. So is this a process of regime adaptation, the regime being the kind of incumbent alignment of actors, institutions and technologies? This framing of the low carbon transition as a challenge of delivering a program of large scale investments, and they kind of draw on different landscape or contextual factors in the trilemma to legitimate this. And will we see what Smith et al. Call an endogenous renewal? Will the regime develop the internal capacity to renew itself? That's a question. We also talk about hybrid logics, this kind of government-market interaction, different low-carbon pathways. This is drawing on Tim's work and work on the Transition Pathways project. So this kind of central coordination, market rules, hybrid pathway as part of this action space dynamic. And this is a key part of this kind of internal regime dynamic, this kind of realignment of actors. Government intervention to de-risk and coordinate large-scale investments, but still a strong role for markets and delivery. And what kind of pathways and framings of a low-carbon transition is this sidelining, and what kind of pathways are being marginalised, particularly for all the civil society and local actors. And then kind of highlight a number of questions that we'd like to kind of take forward that have come up. Are we seeing a process of regime learning? Could this be seen as a positive thing? Is this kind of flexibility and an ability to adapt to changing circumstances? Or is it lock-in? Are we delaying necessary structural change? Is there enough clarity in decision making? This is something that Florian highlighted as well in his study of Dutch energy policy. These mixed policy objectives on the one hand may help to create consensus and coalition building, but on the other hand may create instability and diminished confidence. Do we need a kind of clear hierarchy of objectives? And how can we open up the transition action space, improve participation and the participation of wider civil society? And these are kind of agendas that we're taking forward as part of the Pathways project. And that's it.
Yeah, just as a final point to make, that we are doing some work now as part of the new Realising Transition Pathways project, doing interviews with investors, so both the large-scale investors and new entrants like pension funds, but also looking at some of the more sort of community-scale investors to because we think they're key actors in the system and that they haven't been analysed in enough detail as to how those actors frame the challenges and the sort of language and concepts of risk and uncertainty that they use. So we have everyone's been doing some interviews on that, so hopefully at a future meeting